everyone, and welcome to our panel. My name is Colleen Carroll, and I serve as the NX Unite lead here at Nexus Marketing and will be your moderator for today's panel. Our topic today is harnessing data, analytics, and insights for nonprofits, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation, but as usual, I have a few quick logistics to cover before we jump in and get started. NX Unite is made in partnership with Nexus Marketing and serves as a powerful community resource designed to foster connections and facilitate lasting relationships within the mission-driven sector. On NX Unite, you can find upcoming industry events, suggested influencers to follow, trusted solutions, and cause-driven podcasts. NX Unite also hosts webinars, demos, and of course, panels with experts such as the lovely folks here with me today. I do want to give a big shout out to the sponsor of today's session, Skeleton Key Strategies. Skeleton Key Strategies is a boutique consulting firm that helps nonprofit experts in fundraising, marketing, and data operations to unlock greater efficiency, insights, and impact. Their technology and organizational development consulting services help nonprofits amplify their causes and engage supporters by harnessing the power of your donor data and CRM technology. They come from nonprofits, and because they've been in your shoes, they know what it takes to implement durable strategies that get people, processes, and technology working in harmony. They thrive at the nexus of progressive missions, the humans who love them, and the tools they use to change the world. Thank you so much to Skeleton Key Strategies for supporting the NX Unite mission. Today's hour-long panel will include time both for questions curated by my team and questions from you all, our fantastic audience. So if you are joining us live, please feel free to start submitting your questions at any time during this session. That could be right now. The earlier you get your questions in, the more likely we'll be able to address it, and the more likely we'll be able to get through a larger number of audience questions. So if you have a question in mind, a topic you want to make sure this group covers, feel free to drop it in the chat or put it in the questions tab, and we'll spend the second half of the session addressing as many of these questions as we possibly can. If at any point you're having any technical difficulties or have any logistics issues, please let us know in the chat. My colleague Anton is here under the Team NX Unite username and will do his best to assist. So give a little holler in the chat, let us know what's happening, and we'll figure out how to get you back on and enjoying the session. I did also want to mention that this panel session is being recorded. So if you get to the end and the insight you heard is just so fantastic, you need to hear it a second time right away, that is wonderful news. It's going to automatically be in your email inbox after we wrap up. Give it a few minutes after we finish and you'll have access to that recording. Finally, before I introduce today's panelists, I do want to give a big thank you to our audience, whether you're joining us live and letting us know in the chat where you're calling in from, or you're watching the recording a day from now, a week from now, a month from now. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day and for being part of our NX Unite community. If you are joining us live, I hope you will submit those questions so we can address the topics relevant to you and your team. All right, to begin with our introductions, I'd first like to introduce Justin Birdsong, who's the founder and principal at Skeleton Key Strategies. Justin works with nonprofits to create tangible, sustainable change in a world with limited technology and resources. His expertise spans fundraising and marketing operations, organizational development and design, CRM strategy and Salesforce, business process analysis and workflow engineering, data governance and analytics enablement, workshop design and facilitation, and leadership development coaching. He has held leadership and strategy roles at the ACLU and the Pew Charitable Trusts, focused on providing organizations with the tools to promote human-centric, data-informed decision-making across fundraising, grant-making, and digital engagement. Before founding Skeleton Key in 2022, he served as vice president of consulting for nonprofit organizational development firm Causecraft Consulting. He holds a master's degree in nonprofit leadership from the University of Pennsylvania, which has given him a unique ability to pair organizational strategy with thoughtful, holistic technology change. Justin, thank you so much for being on today's panel.
Thrilled to be here, Colleen. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Up next is Nathan Moore. Nathan serves as the team lead of nonprofit sales and strategy at Civis Analytics. Nathan has spent his career helping nonprofits build modern data programs from the ground up. Today, he leads nonprofit partnerships and strategy at Civis Analytics, where he has supported organizations including Feeding America and Doctors Without Borders in adopting best practices around data warehousing, predictive modeling, and business intelligence. Prior to Civis, Nathan was part of the founding team at Every Action, where he supported large and small organizations in adopting multi-channel CRM technology to support their fundraising, membership, and mass marketing programs. Nathan, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. Excited to talk about this topic more.
As am I. Joining us also is Natalie Yelton. Natalie is the content strategist and copywriter at Canopy Studios. Natalie helps Canopy and a variety of clients tell their story online. Her writing career began 13 years ago in the busy press office of a consumer rights organization in London, England. That's where her love of storytelling began. She's helped the UK government, American corporations, and nonprofits in the UK and Canada define what they want to say, how to say it, and where, so it's heard by the people that matter. Natalie's passion for user-centered design is reflected in the content she crafts, and she's been awarded for it. When she's not writing blogs and landing pages or developing content strategies, she can be found in her garden tending her tomato plants. Natalie, thanks for being here.
Thank you for the introduction, Colleen. Happy to be here.
Finally, joining us today is David Lay. David is the engagement manager at Brooklyn Data Company. David is a former Venture for America fellow who is passionate about analytics, entrepreneurship, and mental health. They currently work at Brooklyn Data Co., a full-stack data analytics as a service consultancy, but previously built on the data stack at the Trevor Project, the nation's largest suicide prevention service for LGBTQ+ young people. The mission of the Trevor Project is still near and dear to their heart and inspires David to imagine how data can be used to inform and architect more just systems for the most vulnerable populations. When David's not sharpening their data skills at Brooklyn Data, you can find them on the tennis court or thrifting. David, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us, Colleen.
All right, it is finally time for me to stop talking and to have it over to our panelists. So Justin, I'm going to have you start us off with our first question. How can nonprofits, regardless of their size or resources, effectively leverage data and analytics to enhance their decision-making processes and mission-driven initiatives?
Thanks. I'd love to be able to kick this one off. So, I was thinking about how even the smallest nonprofits at this point are probably dealing with some kind of data that's critical to the way that they're running their business. I've actually been supporting a mutual aid network in Southern New Jersey that has served hundreds of local families and individuals in need since the pandemic. And they've just been using email and Airtable to manage their relationships. So sometimes simple is completely effective. When I think about what organizations want to be thinking about to leverage data and analytics, I think of a couple of things. And I think the first is a goal. A system should follow a strategy. So even if that strategy is just, I want to feed 100 people or families a month in my local area, that's a simple but very powerful goal that will then help inform all of the other downstream decisions about how data gets collected and updated and safeguarded. You typically will need a system, at least one, some sort of single source of truth for the things that matter about the data that you're collecting. And for that system, you need some sort of owner, a data owner, someone who, at least one person who is thinking about the care of that data, making sure that it is correct, clean, and actionable for whatever purposes you're storing it for. And then I'd like to loop back around and say, like, you set that goal at the beginning. So then ideally you have some kinds of measurements that relate back to that goal, even just basic metrics like, did we get to all the families that we intended to this month? And how many may have had issues with their mutual aid delivery, right? Like even just those two very simple data points will tell us whether or not we are covering the intended number of recipients, whether or not the recipients are satisfied with what we did. And from there, you can go on to make much more powerful and sophisticated decisions.
Justin, thank you so much for starting us off. Nathan, I'm going to bring this same question over to you. If we're looking to effectively leverage data and analytics, what do we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, first I'll just say +1 to everything Justin says, which, I could probably start all of my answers like that today. But there are always incremental steps an organization can take to become more data-driven. If you're a small organization without a bunch of data silos, you probably don't need $1 million budget and a bunch of fancy tools. You might just need to provide better training for your team on your existing CRM, or even on Excel and Google Sheets. Oftentimes, our clients, even the most data savvy, sophisticated ones, are really reluctant to admit to us that they're running significant parts of their data program out of Microsoft Excel, even though it's very common. Excel, our team likes to say that Excel is the OG data tool. And you can think of those spreadsheets that you are managing today really as the beta version of your future data program. I think regardless of where you're at on the data journey, whether you're running your program from a spreadsheet or you have an in-house data science team, there are two really important things to keep in mind when trying to become more data driven. And neither really has to do with increasing your budget or adopting new technology. The first is really simple, and it's to ensure your entire organization is actually aligned on KPIs and what you need to be measuring to begin with. I think a lot of organizations take this for granted. If there's not agreement and kind of regular socialization about what the priorities are for the organization, beginning at the executive level and going all the way to the entry level, it's going to be really hard to build a data-driven culture and bring the organization together around any sort of transformational analytics initiative. And the second is to ensure there's agreement across those same sets of stakeholders that the organization will actually consume and react to what the data says. I can't tell you how many data practitioners I talk to that spend hours building dashboards that nobody looks at, for example. To avoid this, I think there needs to be trust in the data you're collecting and measuring, and trust that that data is reliable and actually accessible to everyone at the organization. And if you're an organization listening to this today that knows you have messy or siloed data, for example, start with a project that enables you to centralize that data and clean it up. Doing this will ensure that your data actually has authority and that you can accurately report on things like how many people you reached with your service offerings, or for like a fundraising example, what the true cumulative giving of your donors is across channels.
Thank you so much, Nathan. All right, I'm excited to hear from our other two panelists, but very quickly, I want to let our audience know that we do have a poll that's just gone live, where we've asked you all how you currently feel your nonprofit is doing when it comes to effectively leveraging data and analytics. If you'd like to share with us kind of where you're entering this conversation from, please go fill out that poll in the poll tab on the bottom bar. All right, Natalie, over to you. How can we effectively leverage data and analytics to enhance our decision-making processes and mission-driven initiatives?
Thank you, Colleen. So as Colleen mentioned, I'm a strategist. I am going to focus on strategy, building on what Justin and Nathan have already mentioned, the importance of having a data strategy, establishing a data strategy internally and setting those really clear goals and objectives. So you want to define what your nonprofit aims to achieve with data analytics before you open a spreadsheet or download Excel. So are you trying to get more volunteers? Do you want to boost your number of regular monthly donors? Maybe you want to improve program delivery. Whatever the goal it is, setting and agreeing on those clear objectives is key. And I would also add, very important aspect is, preparing to adapt your strategies based on what the data tells you. You should continuously iterate, refine your approach so that you can achieve better results based on the findings of your data. Thanks, Colleen.
Thank you so much, Natalie. All right, David, I think you know what question's coming your way. How can we effectively leverage data and analytics?
I feel like we all just did a group project together and answered the same question the same way, because all my notes were hit on by Justin, Nathan, Natalie already. But I think at the core of it is setting the data strategy. I like to say data is only as powerful as the questions you ask of it. Working in consulting with countless number of organizations and countless number of nonprofits, you see again and again that people just looking at the data to tell them a story that they already want to know or already want to confirm. It can be both good and bad, but I think the goodness of that is data can be spliced an infinite number of ways. You can easily get lost in certain rabbit holes and just sort of get lost in that. And what any organization needs, but especially mission-driven ones like nonprofits, they need to stay focused and understand what the core set of questions they're trying to answer with day in and day out. So my recommendation for this, or an easy way to sort of get aligned on this, is just create sort of a limited set of goals, sort of your dashboard KPIs, so to speak, that help you drive every day, and get really good at measuring those. And once you get really good at that, then you can start to consider going down those rabbit holes and going down sort of more granular analyses.
Thank you so much, David. All right, checking in on that poll again, we asked you all, do you feel your nonprofit is currently effectively leveraging data and analytics? 73% of you said somewhat, We use data analytics, but there's room for improvement in terms of effectiveness. 9% of you said yes, we have robust data analytics strategy in place. That's awesome. 9% said no, we have the data, but we're not effectively using it. And you're going to notice the math is not adding up because someone voted, and that's awesome. But 8% said not applicable. Our nonprofit is not currently using data. So we're across the board, but with the biggest group of us coming in at that we use it a little bit, but probably not to the full degree. So thank you all so much for filling that out. It gives us a great idea of where you're coming to this conversation from. All right, Natalie, I'm going to have you start us off with our next question. How can nonprofits prioritize their data analytics efforts to achieve the greatest impact and return on investment?
Yes, so I want to mention the donor journey. And because Canopy is a web development agency, we zero in on how we can boost revenue through how folks navigate through your website and how they reach information about ways to give. Research from Forrester, I repeat this stat on any panel I can. Every dollar invested in user research brings 100 in return. So the American Cancer Society did this really well. They looked at really basic traffic analytics, and they found that folks weren't navigating to one of their breast cancer research initiatives. There wasn't that traffic flow between their main site and that. A very simple tweak to one of their web forms improved that pathway and helped them increase their revenue by nearly 5%. So looking at traffic analytics, site heat maps, along with scrolling click map data can help you find out how folks are navigating through your site and what they're interacting with the most. So this will allow you to make site improvements, even really small tweaks to button text, where things appear on your site that can better meet the needs of your donors, which can lead to more conversion opportunities. And some other high value use cases, looking at optimizing volunteer recruitment and retention, along with how you measure and communicate the impact of your organization's work is key. I would also mention leveraging low-cost tools and resources. I'm a huge fan of Tableau. I think the Tableau public free version is such a powerful tool. I'd love to share a link here. I know they offer a donated licenses for qualifying nonprofits. So if you are looking on ways on how to illustrate or visualize your data, go to Tableau Public, see what they're doing there, get some ideas. I think, it's such a low cost analytics tool that's available to anyone.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Natalie. All right, David, over to you. How can we prioritize data analytics efforts to achieve the greatest impact?
Yeah, as I was writing this out, I was thinking how it depends so much on where the nonprofit is. If they're at the beginning, which I feel like many nonprofits really are, I like the phrase garbage in, garbage out. We really need to ensure the data collection is set up appropriately. As Nathan mentioned, so much analysis can be done in just Excel. So if you just ensure that the data is set up appropriately and all the systems that generate data are set up well, you can do a lot already with very cheap tools. It sounds like Tableau donates licenses, which is great as well. But as Justin mentioned earlier too, in order to do that, I think ideally you'd have a dedicated and strategic data lead, someone who's good at wrangling stakeholders, gaining their trust, and also doing some of the basic analyses. The term full stack analyst, I think, is sort of in recent years become more of a thing where, data analysis has traditionally been more on the back or the front end side of things of delivering analyses, returning the numbers. But there's also analysts now who are very familiar with the back end, which is sort of how data is set up, how you're ingesting the data, and so on and so forth. So I would recommend nonprofits take a look at sort of hiring a full stack analyst that knows sort of the end-to-end life cycle of data.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, David. All right, Justin, over to you. If we're looking to have the greatest impact, what do we need to prioritize with our data efforts?
Plus one to free and low cost and open source tools. I think that will probably be a motif throughout this conversation today. I think also kind of building off of what David was saying, I think the complexity of your data tools, which usually also correlates to the expense of your data tools, really needs to match the sophistication and complexity of what you're doing with them. And so don't run out and buy $1 million business intelligence platform if what your organization is really doing are things like revenue projections and fundraising channel attribution and things that you really can use the Excels and Googles and Tableaus of the world to help you get to. And I think also kind of building off of that, it should also reflect the level of talent, data talent that you have in your organization. Sometimes those powerful tools, even the really open source ones like R and Python that are low or no cost to use, in those cases, what you're really spending your money on is talent. And so I think you want to think carefully about who you are working with to do your analytics work. And a talented data analyst or full stack analyst, et cetera, can do incredible things with open source tools and Excel. And so for your organization, you may want to prioritize talent, either hiring them or outsourcing to consultants in order to get the biggest bang for your buck.
Thank you so much, Justin. All right, Nathan, any final thoughts on how we can prioritize our data analytics efforts?
Yeah, I start with the premise that almost every organization, no matter how sophisticated, has a lot of data problems. Every time we start a conversation with a new client, we ask them about that. They're like, how much time do you got? But no matter the size of the organization, they also have limited budget to address those problems. And for most organizations, those tensions are kind of, laws like gravity. My advice to practitioners at nonprofits who are trying to prioritize data projects is to start at the executive level. Again, this might be obvious, but I think that, not doing that is one of the primary reasons that data projects fail or never get off the ground in the first place, is that they lack buy-in from the executive level, who are the individuals that are most intimately aware of where the kind of what the challenges are facing the organization and where your current kind of data visibility gaps are. So while a CEO or a CFO or a department head may not have data expertise themselves, these individuals are the most likely to have the best educated guess oftentimes at where the biggest return on investment for an analytics program could be. It also doesn't hurt that they are typically the individuals that can authorize hiring staff, like a full stack developer, and signing contracts with vendors if that's what you need to do. And then from there, once you've got that executive buy-in, my advice is to start small. A lot of organizations immediately pivot to making a big investment in a new CRM as part of their data strategy. And while that makes sense sometimes, I would caution folks that migrating to a new CRM is typically a years-long process when you take into account the interviews with all the stakeholders at your organization that touch the CRM to actually going live. And there are plenty of other more flexible analytics tools, including the free or inexpensive ones that the other panelists have mentioned, that enable data practitioners to centralize their data for analysis without having to upend their entire tech stack. So I've seen organizations having great success using those solutions first and creating kind of a realistic analytics roadmap that delivers incremental wins along the way, rather than going for, the big home run with a big Salesforce migration or something like that.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Very quickly, I want to remind our audience to start submitting questions. I see we just got one in the chat. I've got that down on my list, but would love to get some more questions in. Otherwise, I will just be selfish and ask all of my own questions, which would be fine by me. I have a lot of them, but I do want to make sure I give space for our audience to ask questions as well. All right, David, I'm going to have you start us off with our next one. Storytelling is an essential part of nonprofit work. How can our data analytics help nonprofits tell compelling stories to donors and the public that drive engagement and support?
Yeah, as I probably have said ad infinitum, now data is only as powerful as the questions you ask of it. I feel like oftentimes people think of data analytics only as this tail end thing, like, hey, we have this data, let's analyze it. We can't change how the data comes to us. We just have to analyze the data. But really, data analytics concerns itself very closely with products. So every new SaaS tool that you set up generates data. How it's set up is critical, as I mentioned earlier. When we set up data stack for clients, we always ask them, what is your goal for the next 3 months, the next year, and the next 5 years? And this may sound a little bit cheesy or sort of like life coachy, but the purpose of this is to understand the vision and the story that the executive leaders want to be able to tell and sell to both the constituents and to potential donors. So we utilize that story to determine how to establish a system, right? Like, what is your 3-year, 1-year, 5-year, 3-month, 1-year, 5-year goal? And that informs how we set up the data at inception so that we can make sure that we can analyze and provide a data story that answers those goals and those questions.
Thank you so much, David. All right, Natalie, over to you. Thoughts on how data can support our storytelling?
Yeah, agree with David. I think complex data is easier to digest when there's a clear narrative. And the story that you want to tell online is much more compelling when it's backed by data. So I'm going to mention data visualization again. I think using data visualization transforms complex data. It makes it easy to understand for folks. Infographics, charts, graphs, that sort of thing. It helps you tell your nonprofit story online. It also makes it more accessible to a wider audience, not only your board members, but the general public, future and previous donors. A great example of this, Dennis Cow used Canopy client PEN America's data around book bans in the US to create this really powerful visualization of every book that was banned in the US last year. I'll share a link to that in the chat. But again, highlighting success stories, analyze your program data so that you can identify positive outcomes. Share these stories with your audience, showcase tangible impact your organization has had both on individuals and communities. I think don't discount the kind of anecdotal quotes you can include from volunteers and supporters. They add a human touch to your data-driven stories, and they make your data more relatable, and they also evoke emotion.
Thank you so much, Natalie. We have had a poll go live where our audience can let us know how they're feeling about data and storytelling. So let me know if you have any issues with that. But gonna move over to Nathan. What are your thoughts on how data can support our storytelling initiatives?
Yeah, first, just to echo what David and Natalie said, I think storytelling is very underrated. And I think long gone are the days where your data person was a back of the house number cruncher. Today, I think data savvy professionals need to be able to not only process data, but also, understand and articulate the context around it, and help people visualize it. And there are no shortage of tools that help do that. And a number of them have been mentioned already today. I think a really good example of an organization that is surfacing this type of data storytelling for its supporters and advocates and general public is our client Feeding America. They have an example, or they have an interactive dashboard on their website. It's called Map the Meal Gap, and it enables donors or advocates or any visitors to their website to click through an entirely interactive map and drill down even to your local community here in the United States, to understand what your community specific food insecurity rate is, what the average meal cost is, and what the unmet need is in terms of total dollars required to provide adequate nutrition to everyone in that community. And so if you're a donor kind of doing research into your local food bank and where you should give, this is a direct kind of line into where your money would be going and the scale of the problem and why those dollars are so needed. So yeah, I would encourage other organizations listening in today to take similar steps to both show and tell about the work you're doing using visual and written narratives about your data.
Thank you so much, Nathan. All right, Justin, any final thoughts on the relationship between data and our storytelling?
Oh, yes. So I once used to work for a nonprofit arts service organization that gathered data on the US arts and cultural sector. And if there's one group of people that does not particularly think that data in its own right is sexy, it's arts and cultural organizations. And so one of the ways that we tried to make that activity a little bit more compelling was by using storytelling, trying to illustrate all the different ways that data could tell a story about their impact, ranging from an individual organization that's applying for a grant and being able to sort of show that their after school programs reduced student dropout rates by 10% over a 3-year period, something like that, all the way up to lobbying the federal government for more support for the National Endowment for the Arts, because we can demonstrate that the arts and cultural sector nationwide in 2021 contributed $1 trillion to the GDP, but that was below pre-pandemic levels. And so you can use that to sort of make the case for still more additional funding needed. And then, sort of building off of the donor impact story that Nathan was just mentioning with the Feeding America example, on a much smaller scale, being able to do things like tell your donors stories that help them understand their own impact, like even just 80 cents of every dollar you donate goes directly to feeding hungry children in the US. That kind of data storytelling gives people ways to see themselves and their contributions in those numbers. And with any luck, that's hopefully going to deepen their relationship and increase their appetite to continue giving, or potentially increase their own giving or engagement with your organization over time.
Thank you so much, Justin. All right, checking in on that poll, we asked you all, does your nonprofit's data currently form a compelling story? 44% of you said, to some extent, we're working on improving our data storytelling capabilities. 33% said, no, our data hasn't been used to create compelling stories thus far. 10% said absolutely, and 10% said not yet. Again, the math didn't add up, but I promise we're around those percentages. So thank you all so much for filling that out. Nathan, I'm going to have you start us off with our next question. Data security is always and continues to be a growing concern. What measures should nonprofits take to protect sensitive data and ensure compliance with relevant regulations while still using data effectively?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'm going to contradict something I said earlier, which is that organizations that have growing or robust data programs should really move off of their spreadsheets. And that is not because there's anything wrong with those tools. They're great. And many of you have built super savvy pivot tables and Excel formulas that are, informing and empowering your organization's work. The downside of spreadsheets is that they tend to be saved on a person's desktop, and they tend to be emailed between coworkers, between outside consulting partners you're partnering with, and so forth. And if you think of something like a CSV containing audience segments for a direct mail campaign or a marketing campaign, that spreadsheet might have quite a lot of sensitive information that could really negatively impact your organization and your supporters were it to be part of a data breach or something like that. So with that said, I think the steps that all organizations should take are, first, familiarize yourself with the relevant data privacy laws you need to comply with based on the type of work you do, where you do that work geographically, and the type of data you're collecting. And I think, while hiring a lawyer, a cybersecurity expert to help you achieve compliance with those laws is expensive for sure, I assure you it is way less expensive than dealing with a data breach. The second piece of advice is work with your IT team to define a set of security-related data governance rules that ensure that your team are being effective stewards of your supporter and beneficiary data within the systems, hopefully, that you're using to keep track of that today. And then lastly, from the vendor perspective, engage with your vendors. Ask your vendors to participate in a security assessment to make sure that their protocols and security practices align with those protocols that you're setting up with your IT team or cybersecurity person. This is a really typical process that any data vendor or platform vendor that you're working with should have kind of off-the-shelf kind of responses to. I'm filling out spreadsheets all the time with clients' kind of security questions. And most of them are quite similar from client to client. So make sure you're engaging your vendors and understanding their security posture as well.
Thank you so much, Nathan. All right, Justin, over to you. If we're thinking about data security, what do we need to keep in mind?
I really love to emphasize here sort of transparency with your supporters and donors. I think clear opt-ins about when folks are actually choosing to share their data with you and what you're doing with it, written public privacy policies that accurately reflect how your data is being handled on the back end. I think donors and supporters at this point in time expect their data to be treated by nonprofits the same way that Apple or Google are handling it. And they ideally would be able to see what you're using it for, how it's being stored, whether or not you're selling it. And you'd probably like to be able to exercise some level of control over that as a donor as well. So, and this is becoming less and less optional as things like the Colorado Privacy Act, which went into effect in June, which applies to nonprofits. Many other types of regulatory laws like that on nonprofits have gotten sort of a pass, not true for the one in Colorado. And so if you're doing business in Colorado and marketing to Colorado donors, then and you meet those regulatory thresholds, then you have to abide by those rules. I think the last piece of advice is to think about data retention and destruction policies. In my experience, nonprofits really don't want to get rid of data, especially relationship data, longitudinal data. And I get that it's rich and wonderful, but I just think every organization should really be thinking carefully about the risk that may build over time when you're holding on to data after the point where you need it. To all of Nathan's points earlier about data breaches, they are no fun for your reputation or your bank account.
Thank you so much, Justin. All right, David, any additional thoughts on data security and how we need to protect ourselves as nonprofits?
Yeah, totally. So here at Brooklyn Data Co., we abide by the principle of least privilege, which if you Wikipedia that, the summary is just only give people access to the bare minimum that they need to get the job done. So for instance, at Brooklyn Data, a lot of times I'll even have to ask like one specific person for a password every time I need it, just because I usually don't need it that often. But when I do, there's only one person that has access to it. Obviously, you don't want it falling all on one person because if they leave, that's sad. But the general rule of thumb is only a select few need access to particularly sensitive data. So in the case of nonprofits, or at least at the Trevor Project, of course, there is sensitive information and sensitive PII. So you really want to try and just give access to maybe one or two people to that sensitive information, such as name, email, address, etc. There's a lot of great tools in the modern data stack that can help you sort of obfuscate some of that PII if you still want to sort of work with it. There's this term called MD5 hashes in SQL, which you can use to sort of mask the PII when it shows up in the end business intelligence tool. But a great sort of tactical piece here, because I feel like people have talked broadly about sort of the strategies, is if you have PII that you use, you could potentially think of creating a table with that PII and map it to those people. You separate out sort of the end data that you're accessing and the PII, and ultimately, again, as I mentioned, only giving one or two people access to that mapping table so that no one on sort of the end stakeholder side can accidentally access the PII. They would have to go directly to that person that has access to that table to enable it. So just sort of adding, I guess, like purposeful or intentional friction to the process of accessing PII is really, really helpful.
Thank you so much, David. All right, Natalie, final thoughts on data security.
Yes, so Canopy is a web development agency, so I'm going to focus on the data security of your website. Your nonprofit most likely has a website. It most likely collects some sort of donor information. So you'll want a solid security framework in place to protect you from cyber attacks as they become more sophisticated. Canopy specializes in building WordPress and Drupal websites, which are the most secure content management systems available, but they're only as secure as the security updates you have on them. So keep your sites updated, enable two-factor authentication if you can. Look at maybe automating some of those security updates, but also you should enable some sort of kind of password policy, using strong passwords. And also, again, mentioning what David said, limiting user permissions so that you can minimize the risk of potential attacks. Another key thing I'd like to mention is, preparing for a potential data breach, having a communications plan in place, being really transparent with your donors and your stakeholders. In the event that happens. I think the Red Cross last year did a really good job of that when they had a large data breach. They communicated with their board, with the public, and they offered a FAQ, so everyone was kept informed about what that data breach meant to their personal information.
Thank you so much, Natalie. All right, we've had some wonderful questions come in from our audience. So I am going to pivot us over to the audience questions for any of our panelists. I know we had one final question that we were planning on asking today. So if you had your heart set on that question, please message me in the chat. Let me know. I'll make sure you get asked that question, but I am going to move us over to the audience. All right, David, I'm going to have you start us off with this first one. Someone asked, what additional training or courses do you recommend if you are not yourself a data analyst, but have been gently moved into that role?
I wonder how gently. I think that depends on the tools and what kind of data analyst you are. As Justin mentioned, there's tools like R and Python that you can use that require a lot of skill and technical training for. And there's tools like Excel, which you need a little bit less skill to get more familiar with. If it's SQL based, one of the best tools that I found to learn SQL is called the Murder Mystery SQL game. Not sure if anyone's heard of it, but it's a great sort of interactive game where you have to use SQL and build upon your SQL knowledge in order to solve sort of this murder mystery online. Would highly recommend it. Moda Analytics also has a great introduction to SQL course, if that's your vibe. But other than that, if there's specific tools, I think Coursera is a great resource. I've seen some free resources there for Python and R. I honestly think, and I know this is going a little bit too long, it's such a simple question, but one of the best advice that a data mentor gave me was that you need to figure out the framework to approach a data question. And every data question is sort of, where is the data coming from? How do I need to clean the data? How do I want to present the data? What kind of story am I trying to tell? And if you just have that framework, I think the tools are easier to learn. More of the complexity of being a data professional is understanding the why behind the ask and the processes to get there.
Thank you so much, David. Justin, anything you would want to add in terms of someone who has been gently moved into this role?
This kind of it was my own experience a bit many years ago, although I would not consider myself to be a foremost data analyst. I think in terms of resources that are out there that I have seen a lot of people have a lot of success with, I would suggest DataCamp. I think most, if not all of their offerings are paid, but the folks who use them have a really thanks, Natalie. That's exactly what I was going to say. That it seems like that can really give you a number of different paths forward, and sort of sequential learning and units that are sort of built for ongoing work like that. Udemy even, I think, has a number of offerings that can be used for certain kinds of roles. I guess my one piece of advice would be realistic about where you are in terms of starting. Years ago, I tried to do an R bootcamp on Coursera sort of asynchronously, and it turned out I really struggled. I really could have used something a little bit more hands-on in terms of like an actual human that I could have dialogued with as I was learning through the process. So, these sort of like mass online resources are fantastic, but if that's not the type of learner you are, or if you are starting from a slightly more basic skill standpoint and just could use some additional support ramping up, look into something where you're going to actually get a live teacher somewhere along the way.
Thank you so much, Justin. All right, Nathan, Natalie, either you want to jump in, otherwise I'll move us to the next question. All right, Nathan, I'll have you start us off. How can nonprofit organizations effectively measure ROI when the primary goals are social impact and mission driven and traditional revenue metrics may not be applicable? Are there tactics you all have used to define measurement goals like content consumption to show that ROI?
Yeah, we have a number of clients that are like think tank oriented. And so they, of course, have donors they have to raise money from, but they're less kind of mass market fundraising focused, and they're really more about measuring influence. And so I think there's a few things you can do. One, platforms like ours can consume data from Google Analytics and provide a set of tools that allow you to restructure it into kind of more useful reporting formats to measure kind of readership, link that readership to your marketing file and so forth. The other thing that a lot of these clients have been focusing on is doing data augmentation of the people that are reading their new email newsletter, for example. So these think tanks that, again, are really focused on like, how is the content we're putting out influencing decision makers? They'll do a match of their data to a consumer file to better understand the geographic composition of their file, the socioeconomic and racial composition of their file, to validate that they're reaching the right types of people in the right areas with their programming. And so some of those kind of impact measurement capabilities can be hard if you're not, again, kind of as the person who asked the question suggested, like measuring fundraising outcomes and ROI. But there are other ways to sort of model around that, and happy to brainstorm after the panel today too.
Thank you so much, Nathan. All right, Natalie, want to jump in with this question, or would you like to get the next one?
I think Nathan covered it. Happy to cover the next question.
Perfect. Do you have any best practices or past examples of ways to collect, track, and present qualitative data that is not easily quantifiable?
Yeah. So again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I think visualizing your data is key here. So you might have a ton of data. Focus in on 2 or 3 stats. And those stats, those data points should connect to those strategic goals you set at the start. So really narrow down, pick 2 or 3 stats and repeat those across all of your online channels. Really focus on telling that story, visualizing that data, but really narrowing down to 1 or 2 stats that help you get across what you're trying to.
Thank you so much, Natalie. All right, we've had a question come in that I'm going to be honest, I don't know who's going to be the best fit for, but someone asked, is predictive analytics being applied by any of your clients? If so, in what areas? Does someone want to volunteer to jump in on this one? Natalie, and then Nathan?
Yes, so predictive analytics is being used by Canopy's clients for fundraising specifically. And I think, this is something that's only going to become more common in the future, but predictive models can help you forecast donor giving patterns. They can also help you identify potential supporters that you don't have currently in your database, but also optimizing resource allocation. So predictive analytics, for those who don't know, you're extracting information from data to identify patterns to predict future outcomes. So typically nonprofits or a Canopy client will decide they're trying to decide who of their past donors or potential donors to contact for fundraising. This is a very time-consuming process. So when you look at donor records and decide which factors will make them most likely to donate again, you'll be able to assign a donation probability to them. And then based on that historical giving, you can identify patterns, other donor characteristics that give you an idea of the high donation probability, and you'll be able to target your fundraising campaigns more effectively. This cuts down on overhead. It cuts down on cost. You're going to be targeting those donors that are most likely to donate, and it will increase the efficiency of your campaigns.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Natalie. Nathan, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I agree with everything Natalie said about both the kind of approach and methodology and the benefits of predictive analytics generally. 2, I think, cool use cases that we've seen our clients implement. One is a human rights organization that had, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, raised a ton of its mid-level fundraising dollars from in-person events. And obviously 2020 happened, and as we're all familiar, in-person events weren't a thing for a while. And so they needed to figure out quickly how to make that gap up. And because they had all their data centralized and a bunch of modeling tools available to them, they were able to build a predictive model that looked at their full kind of lower dollar kind of membership level giving population and identify the best candidates to send a solicitation to upgrade their gift to a higher level, what they call kind of a mid-level gift. And they were, that model that they were able to build and test and validate was highly performant and actually resulted in them, even in 2020, having their best mid-level campaign to date, despite those limitations. And then the other use case that we've seen is with arts organizations. These are organizations that, like other nonprofits, have a kind of patronage that is, or a group of members that are older and whiter than the public as a whole, particularly in the communities they serve. And so they're able to build, or they're trying to build, predictive models that help both identify people who don't look like those individuals that are in their community but might otherwise be interested in going to a museum or the museum's programming or becoming a member. But also, in order to keep revenue coming in, are identifying lookalike audiences in that same community that, again, resemble that existing donor cohort, but haven't yet given to the museum or arts organization. So those are two kind of use cases we've seen, both sort of financial in nature in terms of fundraising, but can also be extrapolated to non-fundraising use cases as well.
Thank you so much, Nathan. All right, unbelievably, we are getting to the end of our hour, so I do have to have us start wrapping up. I have one final question I'm going to ask each of the panelists to wrap us up. But before we get there, if you have any lingering questions, if we did not get to your question, you didn't submit the question because maybe it was too specific to you and your work, but you have it, I want to make sure to connect you with the person who can answer it. So we've just put a survey in the chat. It's going to be there in just a moment from Team NX Unite, where you can let us know who we should put you in touch with to be able to answer your question. If you have a particular panelist in mind, let us know. If you, all of the above, any of them could answer it, but you need an answer, let us know. We'll make sure to connect you with the people so you can get your question answered. All right. Final question for our panelists. And Justin, I'm going to have you start us off with this one. It's kind of big and broad, but it's my favorite way to end a panel. What do you see as the future for nonprofits, and how can nonprofits get ahead today?
A lot of pressure. Well, I think that my main thinking is, especially if an organization is looking to data as a way forward, if you're interested in data-informed decision making and being able to sort of harness the insights that you can from all of these different data stores your organization may be collecting, there really needs to be a lot of investment in data talent. And not just investment in hiring the talent, but putting those folks in a position to actually have a seat at the strategic table, that they can actually help guide some of the decisions that are being made, products or that are being either implemented internally or developed for external use, et cetera. Because, data is a massive landscape and it's ever changing, and there's constant proliferation of new tools. We've not stopped talking about AI all year, as though AI was new this year, and it's not, right? But I think when you lean into, this is about tools and this is about infrastructure, then I think it very quickly you outstrip your own capabilities if you don't have the right talent in the organization that can actually leverage those tools and know which tools are required for the job that you're trying to do to get the information out of them. So whether that's hiring folks or working with contractors or consultants, I think you want to make sure that you have the right talent. Sometimes that talent is a data engineer and not an analyst, because if your data is a total mess, and you hire an excellent data scientist, they're going to spend all of their time and skill just trying to get your tables clean. And that's probably, again, not the best use of that person's skill set. So think carefully about who you're working with, because the data itself will stay at rest unless it's brought to life by some sort of talented individual in your organization. So make sure that you've got the right people on your team.
Thank you so much, Justin. All right, David, thoughts on the future and how our nonprofits can get ahead today?
I think echoing Justin's points, I think this is true for any organization, and the nonprofits I've worked with, there's so much manual work that still goes on. And because people care about the mission so much, they're willing to sort of eat it, so to speak, and just say, let me put my head down and do it because it needs to get done, which is great. And we love that. But ultimately, it's not the first time that a company has had to make manual process into something more automated. There's a playbook for it that a lot of companies have done. As a consultant working across many different clients, you would think that the data problems that, belabor each client is so different, but it's really all the same. They all want to centralize their data. They all want it to be clean, and they all want it to be easily accessible. So I think because there's this playbook out there to sort of centralize it and to clean it up and to automate a lot of things, that's where a lot of potential lies for nonprofits as well. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of the modern data stack has become relatively cheaper in the recent years. A lot of these offering huge discounts for nonprofits. When I was working in the nonprofit space and negotiating, not arguing, for these contracts, you would get up to 50 to 75% off these annual contracts of what they were sort of initially sticking us with. So there's a lot of cheaper options out there now, and I think there's a great way to sort of centralize and streamline a lot of the data work.
Thank you so much, David. All right, Natalie, thoughts on the future and how we can get ahead today?
Yes. So the future for nonprofits, I think, will likely be shaped by evolving donor expectations, especially the Gen Z or Gen Z for those folks south of the border. They expect a seamless donation experience paired with concise, compelling stories that are data backed. So personalization, tailoring communications, engagement efforts, including individual donors' preferences will be crucial. You know, use your data, use automation to personalize your outreach, to build stronger relationships with your donors, tailoring messages based on their preferences and that historical data that you have. And finally, Justin mentioned it, the rise of AI. I think nonprofits will have to focus on managing AI risk. So with that advancement, we need to think about how we use that data effectively and ethically. Data quality, trust will be front of mind. So navigating those AI risks will become even more important, building trust and ensuring responsible AI practices. So think about governance, think about how you're going to maintain stakeholder trust, but then as AI evolves, we'll need to ensure we're leveraging AI responsibly, and we're thinking about fairness, transparency, and the protection of donor rights.
Thank you, Natalie. All right, Nathan, final thoughts on the future and how we can get ahead.
Yeah, happy to bring us home here. I like all the other panelists have all said, I think everyone's still very focused on the ChatGPT moment of 2022 and trying to understand the ways in which generative AI will change their organization's work moving forward. I think for nonprofits, these types of machine learning backed technologies offer great promise, also offer great anxiety for all the reasons Natalie discussed. But to just take the optimistic side, we'll be able to accelerate research for research-based nonprofits, curate better digital experiences for beneficiaries that are accessing our services, and make more tailored, personalized asks of donors as well, of course, all with less intervention and data wrangling than we've had to do for the last decades plus. But I think what will ultimately prevent or delay many organizations from taking advantage of these breakthrough technologies is lacking data governance. There was a Wall Street Journal article from over the summer that talked about how there are Fortune 500 companies that are scrambling to redirect all of their internal resources toward figuring out how to take advantage of generative AI, to bring new products to market and boost profits. And what many of these companies found is that in many cases, their data was so siloed and unreliable and dirty that it wasn't usable as an input for any machine learning. It would not be a data panel today if I didn't repeat what David said earlier, which is, garbage in equals garbage out. And so for organizations to take advantage of many of these kind of AI breakthroughs, it really is about just setting up the fundamental data governance systems and processes that can centralize and ensure that your data is clean.
Thank you so much, Nathan. All right, with that, we have reached the end of our panel. I want to give a huge thank you to our panelists. I know if we were in person, there'd be a round of applause. So just know I'm sharing that emotionally through the screen today. I do also want to give a big thank you to our audience. Thank you to those of you who joined live for submitting your questions, or if even you were just here or you're sending your emojis, thank you for your time. Thank you also to those of you watching the recording. Really appreciate you being here. Very quickly, I want to mention that we have a packed fall of panels ahead of us related to the nonprofit space. So keep your eye out for sessions on volunteer onboarding, financial strategies, best practices, leveraging tech for positive impact, and more. You can find all that information on the NX Unite website and the NX Unite LinkedIn. Finally, I want to give another huge thank you to our sponsor of today's session, Skeleton Key Strategies. And with that, that is the end of our panel. Thank you all so much. I hope you all have a nice rest of your day. Bye, everyone.